first heard about the school from an old gas station attendant on a back road in rural Iowa. He spoke like it was a legend. One of those don't go there stories locals tell to scare outsiders. But something about the way he looked over his shoulder while mentioning it told me it was more than a myth. He didn't give me exact directions, just said, "It's where the road ends, past the corn, where the map forgets." That alone piqued my curiosity. After driving through an endless stretch of dry, rustling cornfields and gravel roads that grew narrower with each mile, my GPS stopped working. No signal, the compass spun. Still, I pushed forward until I saw it. A chain-link fence twisted and broken, surrounding a two-story brick structure, half swallowed by vines and trees. There were no signs, no school name, no numbers on the building. Just a crumbling shell of red brick and busted windows, isolated and forgotten. The odd thing was, the path leading to the entrance looked recently walked on. The grass was flattened and the dirt had fresh indentations. I chalked it up to wildlife or maybe other explorers like me, though it didn't quite feel right. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, just the creaking of the building. As it settled, I pushed the heavy wooden doors open. They groaned with effort, but not as much as you'd expect from something untouched for decades. They opened to easily. Inside, the air was musty, but not thick with mold or dust like I'd expected. The entryway had lockers lining both sides, some rusted shut, others slightly ajar. Old-school posters still clung to the walls, faded with age, but somehow untouched by graffiti or damage. As I stepped further in, the lights above flickered. I froze. There was no power here. I had passed no wires or poles coming in, and the building itself looked long disconnected from the grid. And yet, every few steps, a different light would blink to life only for a second, then fade. It felt like the building was watching me, reacting to my presence in slow pulses of awareness. I pulled out my flashlight, sweeping it across the long corridor. Desks had been shoved against the walls, and some still bore carved initials or gum stuck to the undersides. Everything looked abandoned, sure, but not untouched, as if the place had only recently been left behind. I looked down at the dusty floor and froze. Footprints, small ones, like those of a child, clear and deep in the layers of dust coating the hallway. But what chilled me most was not their presence. It was their direction. They led straight ahead, and only ahead. No returning. Prints, no loop. Just a single trail moving inward, deeper into the heart of the school. I followed them, careful not to disturb the pattern. They passed a row of classrooms, all with their doors wide open. Inside, I caught glimpses of old wooden desks arranged in perfect rows. One room even had a globe still spinning slowly on the teacher's desk, though I hadn't touched it. The walls still had chalkboards covered in faded writing, as if a lesson had just ended, not decades ago. One blackboard read, in large dusty letters, "Do not leave your seat." The trail continued toward the gymnasium at the far end of the corridor. As I got closer, the temperature dropped. My breath started to mist in the air, and I could hear something ahead, a low, rhythmic sound like creaking floorboards under pressure. I pushed open the double doors to the gym and paused. It was darker here. My flashlight beam danced across the floor, revealing more footprints leading to the center. There was something else now. Drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled across the gym floor, but again no returning trail. The marks ended in the middle of the court and then vanished. The bleachers were folded against the walls, but I saw movement in the corner. When I turned my flashlight there, nothing was visible, just shadows. The gym had windows up high, but none let in light. The outside world, somehow, had dimmed. The only sound now was the building itself, settling, breathing. I stepped to the middle of the gym and crouched down to examine the end of the trail. The dust here was disturbed in a circular pattern, like something had spun rapidly. Beneath, the dust, etched into the floor, were carvings, symbols I didn't recognize. Not words, not numbers. Shapes that seemed to shift the longer I looked at them. Then the overhead lights flashed. All of them, once, twice, then darkness, and a child laughed right behind me. I moved carefully through the dim hallway, still shaken by the echo of the child's laugh in the gym. It had sounded so real, so close yet. When I turned around, there had been nothing there. No shadows, no figures. Just the cold breath of silence rushing back in. I told myself I imagined it. The isolation, the setting, the heavy stillness. My mind was playing tricks on me. But part of me didn't believe that. Not after the way the lights had flickered and the footprints had led only inward. I continued exploring the classrooms one by one. The doors groaned on rusted hinges, but each room looked almost perfectly preserved. Desks were still arranged neatly in rows, many with textbooks and open notebooks sitting on top. The chalkboards were covered in equations, vocabulary lists, and incomplete sentences, like someone had simply stood up in the middle of teaching and never came back. Some boards even had names written under attendance, dated decades back, yet as clear as if written yesterday. I ran my fingers along the chalkboard. The dust was minimal, too minimal. In one room, a child's jacket hung neatly on the back of a chair, the sleeves swaying slightly though no wind touched it. In another, a paper airplane sat frozen mid-fold on a desk, yellowed and brittle but untouched by time. There were no signs of vandalism or natural decay, no shattered glass, no signs of animal intrusion. It was as if the building had frozen in time the moment it was abandoned. Then I heard it, the bell, one long mechanical clang echoing down the hallway, followed by silence so abrupt it made my ears ring. I stood frozen. There was no power. The building had no connection to the grid, no functioning systems. That bell shouldn't have worked, and yet it rang. I looked down the hallway. All the classroom doors I had passed were now closed. Every single one. I hadn't touched them. No wind could have slammed them all shut simultaneously. I stepped toward the nearest door and reached for the knob. Locked. I tried the next one. Also locked. Every door I tried, even ones that had opened freely before, was now sealed shut. The hallway grew colder, and the lights above flickered again. The silence began to fill with noise, low whispers, just out of reach, as though dozens of children were speaking just below the edge of my hearing. I pressed my ear to one of the classroom doors. For a moment, I heard scratching, soft, repetitive, like fingernails dragging across a wooden desk. Then something heavier, like a chair being slowly dragged across the floor. I pulled back. The whispers faded. The light above me dimmed until only a red emergency glow lit the hallway in pulses. Then, from somewhere on the second floor, I heard it, children laughing. Not joyful laughter, not innocent or light. It was layered, echoing, distorted, like the sound had been run through something that twisted it. I didn't know why, but the tone of it sent shivers straight through my spine. It felt staged, rehearsed, like they weren't laughing at anything. They were pretending to laugh, because they knew someone was listening. I hesitated, but I had to see. I found the stairs and crept up. The second floor was darker, the ceiling lower, and the air stagnant. Dust floated in the red emergency glow, and the walls were lined with faded student artwork, crayon-drawn houses and stick figures, all smiling under blue skies. But the farther I walked, the more the drawings changed. Smiles turned into jagged lines, skies turned black, houses were replaced with cages. One drawing had a figure trapped behind bars, surrounded by others with hollow faces and wide, red mouths. I felt like something was watching me through the drawings themselves. At the end of the hallway, a classroom door stood wide open. The light inside flickered unnaturally, like a strobe effect. I approached slowly, and when I stepped inside, I froze. Every desk in the room had an open textbook. Each book displayed a page from a lesson on obedience. Phrases like "be silent," "stay in line," and "the bell decides" were underlined over and over. In the front of the class was an old reel projector, spinning with no film loaded, yet casting images onto the wall. Images I couldn't make sense of, faces in pain, symbols. A classroom submerged underwater. Then I saw them, reflections in the window that didn't match what should have been behind. Me, children, pale, still standing among the desks. But when I turned round, the room was empty. Then the bell rang again, sharper this time, and I felt the floor vibrate slightly beneath me. A cold gust passed over my neck, and behind me, in a voice as clear as my own, a child whispered, "Class isn't over." After that whisper in the classroom, I nearly ran. Every instinct in me screamed to leave the building, to find a way out, even if it meant smashing through a window. But something deeper, curiosity, maybe obsession, kept me moving. I didn't run. I walked slowly back into the hall, trying to keep my breathing calm. The second floor had grown darker somehow, and the lights pulsed like a slow heartbeat, each flicker casting long shadows that seemed to stretch the wrong way. I descended the stairs, thinking I'd head for the exit. I needed air, space, sunlight, anything. But the oppressive presence inside that school. But as I reached the base of the stairs, I saw something strange. A door I hadn't noticed before, halfway open, with chipped paint and rusted hinges. A breeze whispered out from it, damp, cold, and metallic. I realized it was the door to the basement. I hadn't seen it earlier, which was odd. The entrance had been concealed behind an old bulletin board, now lying on the ground as if deliberately removed. I stepped inside. The staircase was narrow and steep, the walls pressing in tight on either side. My flashlight flickered again, and I shook it, trying to keep the beam steady. The deeper I went, the more the air shifted. It wasn't just colder, it was thicker, harder to breathe. The scent changed. It wasn't just mold or dust. It was something older, more industrial, like scorched metal and melted plastic, mixed with something organic, something rotting. When I reached the bottom, I expected a typical storage basement, maybe a boiler, old janitor supplies, dusty file cabinets. But what I found was nothing like that. The room stretched wide, concrete from floor to ceiling, but sections of the walls were covered in burned-out school posters and melted student desks. Scattered across the floor were charred remnants of toys, plastic figurines, the cracked head of a doll, the scorched spine of a picture book. All of them had been burned, but not completely destroyed. It was as if they had been arranged into some kind of pattern before the fire reached them. A circle, I realized. a ring of melted remnants, surrounding the rusted frame of what might once have been a teacher's desk. I stepped carefully into the room, my boots crunching on broken glass and ash. In the far corner, near an ancient furnace, I saw claw marks, etched deep into the concrete. Not scratches, not graffiti, deep, desperate grooves, as if someone or something had tried to climb the walls. The pattern wasn't random. There were dozens, all clustered around a single section of wall. I ran my flashlight over it and saw something even worse. Fingernails, actual fingernails, broken and embedded in the concrete. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and that's when I heard the breathing. It didn't come from behind me or above. It came from beneath the furnace. Deep, ragged, wet inhales, like something massive was asleep under the floor and had just begun to stir. I held my breath, straining to listen. For a moment, it stopped. Then something moved behind the furnace. Not a shadow and outline. Tall, thin, slouching, its limbs too long. Bending the wrong way as it stepped once into view, then stopped. I froze. Its face, or what should have been its face, was entirely blank. No features, just a smooth surface like a melted mask. But even without eyes, I knew it was looking at me. The flashlight flickered, and when it came back on, it was gone. The room was empty again. I turned to run, but the hallway had changed. It was no longer a staircase. It stretched straight forward, the walls covered in old lockers, some of which were vibrating softly. I walked faster, then broke into a run. Every locker I passed rattled louder. Then one burst open. A blackened, burned doll fell out, landing at my feet. Then another, and another. Dozens of lockers popped open in a wave behind me, each spilling melted toys, broken rulers, fragments of children's shoes. The hallway groaned like it was collapsing in on itself, and that wet, heavy breathing returned now louder. Right behind me, I ran toward a red glow at the end of the hall, not caring where it led, just hoping it would get me out. The glow grew, brighter, until I reached a set of double doors that looked like they belonged to a classroom, not a basement. I burst through them and found myself back in the main lobby. I spun around. The basement entrance was gone. Nothing but a blank wall with that old bulletin board rehung, neat and scented, like it had never been touched. My flashlight died. The air returned to normal, but in my hand, still clutched tight from when I'd fled, was the cracked, scorched head of a doll, and on its forehead, scrawled in something dark and dry, were the words, "We never left." I returned to the second floor after my encounter in the basement. My pulse was still high, hands still trembling, and the strange doll head I'd brought up from below had vanished somewhere along the way. I didn't remember dropping it. It was just gone. The hallway now looked different than before. Longer, somehow. A turn that hadn't existed earlier now bent sharply to the left, revealing an unfamiliar wing of the building. The air was heavier here, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed irregularly, like they were struggling to stay alive. I moved cautiously, aware of every sound, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight, the whine of electricity in the ceiling, the subtle rustling that came from no clear direction. One classroom stood out. Its door was closed, but had a strange marking scratched into the wood, a circle with a jagged X through it. Unlike anything I'd seen so far, it looked fresh, not aged like the rest of the building. Instinct said to walk away. Curiosity said otherwise. I turned the knob, it clicked open. The room inside was unlike the others. Instead of desks scattered randomly or abandoned mid-use, this classroom had been arranged. Dozens of small wooden desks were lined in perfect symmetry, all facing the front. And in every single seat sat a doll. Each one was unique, some hand-stitched, some porcelain, some plastic, but all had lifeless eyes staring forward at the chalkboard. The light in the room was dim, casting long shadows from the dolls across the floor like rows of miniature students. At first, I thought they were just ordinary props left behind. But as I stepped farther inside, I noticed their heads were tilted ever so slightly upward to uniformly to be coincidental, as if they'd been arranged to look toward something. The air here was freezing, and I could see my breath forming, clouds that drifted and dissolved slowly above the desks. I walked carefully toward the chalkboard. It was covered in scribbled writing, but the text didn't look like anything I recognized. The letters were backwards, smudged, written over themselves like someone had written frantically in reverse. Still, a phrase stood out, scrawled in thick white chalk, uneven and shaking. "Turn around only if you're ready to learn." The message crawled down my spine like ice. I didn't want to turn around. I knew what I'd see. But I did it anyway. Every single doll had turned its head. Now they were all looking directly at me, not at the board, not at the teacher's desk. Me, my breath caught in my throat. I took a step back. Their eyes didn't blink. They didn't move again. They didn't need to. The message was clear. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't allowed to walk away. I turned toward the teacher's desk. It was old, massive, carved with names and symbols, and coated in dust. But something was underneath it, a small bundle, wrapped in cloth. I hesitated, then crouched to inspect it. Carefully, I unwrapped the cloth and found a stack of faded drawings. Children's drawings. Dozens of them, each one more disturbing than the last. The first few were innocent enough stick. Figure families, playgrounds, houses with trees. But as I flipped through, the images began to change. Children crying behind windows, teachers with blank stretched faces, a large, shadowy figure looming over classrooms filled with screaming kids. One drawing showed the same dolls I now stood before, sitting in perfect rows with XS drawn over their eyes and blood-red crayon pooled beneath their feet. The last drawing was an acceptable portrait. A child, alone, hands pressed against a classroom window. Behind them was a wall full of dolls. And scribbled in the corner were the words, "They never let me leave." I stood up, heart racing, and slowly made my way back toward the door. My hand touched the knob and the classroom door slammed shut. On its own, the lights blinked off, leaving only the cold red emergency light humming like a predator breathing in the dark. The dolls were no longer sitting in their desks. They were now on the floor, closer, in a semi-dash circle. Closer, I backed away slowly, clutching the cloth bundle to my chest like a talisman. My foot brushed something one of the dolls. It was warm. I didn't think about it. I bolted to the door, yanked it open with all my strength, and stumbled back into the hallway. The classroom was suddenly silent. I looked back. Everything was exactly as it had been when I first entered. Desks in rows, dolls staring forward, but one of the desks was now empty, and I didn't know which one. I ran down the hallway, my lungs burning and heart racing, unsure if I was escaping something or running deeper into its grip. I needed to get out. I needed air, light, Anything but this place. I made for the front entrance, the main doors I had pushed open earlier. I remembered them, clearly tall, wooden, aged but intact. I knew they were just beyond the lobby, past the broken trophy cases and the faded school crest. But when I reached the spot where they should have been, they weren't there. Instead of doors, there was a smooth, featureless concrete wall. I froze, blinking. I ran my hands along the wall, searching for seams, cracks, hinges, something. But there was nothing. The wood, the windows, the frame all gone, replaced by a slab of cold, grey stone that radiated finality. I stepped back, hoping I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd turned down the wrong hallway. But no, the mural of the school's founding year was still here, the same as before. Only now partially charred, as if smoke had rolled over it years ago. I turned in a slow circle, trying to keep calm, trying to think. That's when I heard the intercom. It cracked. On with a loud burst of static that made me flinch. Then came a voice. A woman's voice. Calm. Soft. Too calm. Too soft. Michael, it said. My name. I hadn't told anyone my name. I hadn't spoken to anyone but that old man at the gas station. I stood still, blood rushing in my ears. Michael, please return to your classroom. You're not dismissed. The intercom clicked off. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I wasn't just being watched. I was being expected. This wasn't an accident. I wasn't just trespassing. I was a participant. I backed into the hallway and turned a corner, only to find that the layout of the school had changed again. The hallway now looped where it should have dead-ended, and every time I looked over my shoulder, I could swear the posters on the walls were shifting. Where once there were science fair flyers and spelling bee photos, now there were punishment charts. Silence equals safety, read one. Another was just a black and white picture of a child's face with red crayons scratched across the mouth. I ran, but the school ran faster. No matter how many corners I turned, the doors repeated. The same classroom, the same water fountain, the same sagging ceiling tile, and each time I passed it, the intercom buzzed again. Michael, this is your final warning. Please sit down and face forward. I found a janitor's closet and ducked inside, slamming the door shut. It was dark, but I didn't care. I needed to breathe. I needed a plan. I needed time. I slid down against the wall and pulled out my phone, dead. I hadn't noticed it go black, but it was cold now, lifeless. Not even a flicker when I held the power button. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, not hurried, not searching, just coming. They stopped outside the door. Knock, knock, knock. I covered my mouth, holding my breath. Michael, the voice said again, closer now. Not through the intercom, from the other side of the door. Class is waiting. Then silence. I stayed in the closet until the air grew too tight to breathe. When I finally opened the door again, the hallway outside was different. No longer modern or even mid-century. It looked older, 1930s, maybe earlier. The walls were brick. The floor was polished wood. The lockers were all gone. And the end of the hallway wasn't concrete anymore. It was another classroom door, painted black. I walked slowly toward it. The door opened before I could touch it. Inside, the desks were filled. Not with dolls, with children, real children. Silent, still, all facing forward, all pale. Not one turned to look at me. And behind the teacher's desk stood a woman with no face. just skin stretched over where features should be. She gestured toward the empty seat in the front row. I shook my head, but my feet moved. I sat. The children turned toward me all at once. Their mouths opened in unison, wide, silent. Their teeth were wrong. Too many, too sharp, too clean. The faceless teacher began writing on the chalkboard, but no chalk touched it. Words just appeared. Welcome back. I tried to stand, but I couldn't. My limbs were frozen. My voice caught in my throat. Then, from the ceiling speaker, that same voice returned. Michael has returned to class. We may now begin. And the door behind me melted away.